One of the things that we need to do before we actually dive into this, because in the grasses there's, as is the case with a lot of different groups of plants, there's some specialized terminology that we need to know. Of course, in looking at the sedges, when we've done that in other videos, we saw there are things like achenes and bracts and scales and these sorts of things. And so, and that's somewhat specialized terminology in the grasses. It in some ways it's a little more difficult, but there's similar types of structures. And so I have a set of illustrations here from Grass Identification Guide published in 1979 by Brown. And of course, some of this is pretty general stuff. So the habit, okay, well, this is kind of general what not only grasses, but lots of things sort of look like that. I mean, very generally speaking. But one of the things that we saw in the Godfrey and Wooten key, when we got to the section where in that key where you're distinguishing between grass family and the sedge family, one of the things that they mention in there is whether the leaves are 2-ranked or 3-ranked, I believe it is. And the 2-ranked means that they alternate, but they come out on the opposite sides of the branch. So one will branch off to one direction, and then up a little bit above that, a leaf will come out and branch out in the other direction. And so in this illustration here, that's what they're trying to illustrate, is that 2-ranked, not really and I know I said branching, but not branching, but the way in which the blades of these leaves, I guess, emerge out from the stalk or the culm, as it's referred to in grasses, in this 2-ranked manner, one on one side, then the other on the other, and alternating along the culm. And then, of course, at the top of this, there's an inflorescence. The next illustration here, what they're showing is that sheath that's open. So if you've seen the video where I work through the Knoebel key to grasses, sedges, and rushes, and then where I work through the Godfrey and Wooten to get to the grass and sedge families, one of the characters there was this sheath here where you have a node, or it's I think called a joint in one of the keys we saw. And the leaf begins here, but there's a sheath that grows up the culm for a little ways, and then the blade of the leaf comes out from that point. So you have the sheath, and it's actually open. So there's a slit here where you can actually take that using forceps or a probe or whatever, and actually, I mean, with your fingers, if the plant's large enough, and open that sheath up. And then at the point where that sheath and the leaf contact, there's a structure there referred to as a ligule. And this is one of the things that can have lots and lots of a diversity of forms in grasses, the ligule. Sometimes it'll be hairs, sometimes it'll just be a non-hairy, a glabrous ring around the culm at that point. Sometimes there will be sort of a thin membrane of tissue sticking up. There's a diversity of structures that you can find at the ligule that help you identify what genus, what species you're looking at. And then over here, the really kind of the meat of this that I wanted to look at for this video is here with the flowers. So they say this is a generalized spikelet, and then here's a flowering spikelet. So the spikelet, as I've mentioned in some of the other videos, this is the structure where you have a number of flowers that are arranged along this thing. That number could be 1, depending on what this particular species that you're looking at. But in this case here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 flowers, or in grasses, a lot of times they'll be referred to as a floret, a small flower. And so those emerge here, and each one of the flowers in this diagram has on one side, the side that is nearest the base of the spikelet, it has a structure that's kind of like a leaf, I guess. It's it'll be a little green or maybe whitish, yellowish leaf-looking structure called the lemma. And that's going to be on the lower side of the floret, the side toward the base of the spikelet. And then on the other side, there's a structure, pardon me, a fairly similar structure that's referred to as a palea. So in each floret, you'll have a lemma, a palea, and then down at the base of the spikelet, you have two more structures that look a lot like the lemma and palea. In some species, they're very similar. In other species, the glooms are very distinct from the lemma, which will be very distinct from the palea. So these, again, are some important structures if you're trying to identify grass species. In this particular spikelet, in this diagram here, there are two glooms. So there's a little small gloom at the very base of the spikelet. Then there's a larger gloom, and then we have a floret over here that would have a lemma and a palea, another floret with a lemma, a palea, lemma, palea, lemma, palea, like that, going from the base of the spikelet out toward the tip. All right. Now, when the flowers are flowering, okay, so at a time that's referred to as anthesis, that's when the flowers are flowering. They'll kind of look like this over here. These structures, I'm assuming this is meant to represent the lemma and palea, so these would probably be glooms, and then we have a lemma and palea. But you'll see the anthers and or the stigma sticking out of these flowers. So you'll have the structures there, and then maybe the stigma stick out of the top of it. A lot of times they're going to be black structures. What other colors? Well, and sometimes they're yellow. Corn is a grass, for example. So yellow, black. Sometimes I've seen them that are kind of reddish or purplish. But anyway, those little flower parts, the stigma and the anthers, will stick out of the upper portions of the floret at anthesis, at the time when the flower is flowering, for lack of a better word. Okay, so there's a lot of terminology, very specialized terminology for grasses. And we're going to see some of these structures when we work through a key to look at a couple of them. As was used in the video I made, there's videos looking at identifying some sedges, video working through the whole kind of key of monocots to get to the grass and the sedge and the rush family. I used, let me see if I can get over here. I used this book, The Aquatic Wetland Plants of the Southeastern United States by Godfrey and Wooten, published in 1979. And I'm going to use that again here. I just want to make sure, point out, I'm using the key that I'm using is from this book. And I know sometimes this book may be out of print. A couple of times, I have two sets of it. I don't think I had any problems getting either. They were ordered at different points in time, and I didn't have any problems getting them. But I've heard of people having difficulty getting these. But again, it's very useful. It's a 2-volume set, the monocots and the dicots. So if you're interested in wetland plants in the southeastern United States, this is a really good tool to have. But anyway, we're going to start with the grass family. Let me get some water. So we're working in the grass family. I'm not gonna again bother going through that whole key because we've done that previously in another video. And so we're gonna just jump right in here with the grass family key. And so we come down, and so number one, plants rarely observed in flower. Of course, if you only go to a place once and you see the plant and it is in flower, maybe you don't know if it's rarely observed in flower. But one of the things that they're talking about here are things like the native cane species that we have that flower on really long cycles. And so that sort of thing that flowers very infrequently. That's not what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with plants that basically you can find flowers every year on these things. So it's not that. So plants flowering regularly is the other option. And then number 4 under that, are there soft or silky hairs present throughout the spikelet bearing portion of the inflorescence? And that's not the case with the ones that we're looking at today. So the first one that we're looking at, so it's not like in another video, we looked at Scirpus cyperinus, a sedge species that had these bristly hairs all through it and everything. You may be familiar with some grasses like the, I think it's called Cordillera It's the plume, the pampas grass from South America and that sort of stuff. But anyway, that's not what we're dealing with here today. So this is something that does not have plumes. I don't know how well you can see this, but I'm going to show you a microscope in a minute. There are no plumes in the inflorescence on this. And in fact, that's not the case with any of the 3 grass species that I have here. So, so we can, for all 3 of them, we can go ahead and go past the 1s, the 4s, and go to this number 4 at the bottom of what's page 81 of the Godfrey and Wooten key. Softer silky hairs are not present throughout the spikelet bearing portion of the inflorescence. And so then, once we say that, then we flip over to the next page, and we're on a number 11. All right, and so here is where, for the first 2 specimens we're going to look at, we actually end up in this section. So we get pretty lucky. And the next question for us, pardon me, the next question for us is, do the spikelets appear in 2 or more rows on one side of the axis that bears them? Okay, so there's a, pull this back over here. So each one of these structures here, so this would, I guess, would be referred to as a spike here, I guess. And you have individual spikelets within here. So, so are the spikelets, where do we go? Are the spikelets in 2 or more rows on one side of the axis that bears them? Or in 1 or more rows on either side of one of the angles of a 3-angled axis? Okay, that gets kind of complicated, but and it's probably really difficult to see this in the video, but this thing there, it almost wants to have sort of a flat backside on it back here, and then on the other side of this, the individual spikelets are basically, they're arranged in 2 rows. So you can see there's a line of stalks with the spikelets on them going up one side of a little midrib on this axis, and then on the other side the same thing. So it's in 2 rows on one side. So one side is naked, almost like just a blade of grass here, and then the other side you have the spikelets in 2 rows on there. Okay, so so in fact, I think that even, whoops, I think we even have enough information from what I just said that we can go a little bit further in the key. So number 11, spikelets in 2 or more rows on one side, which is the case. And so now we come down here, maybe it was a little bit further, the number of rows. So this is the next one here, number 12, spikelets are sessile. So sessile, or sessile, that's how I usually say it, means that there's not a little stalk. So let's flip over here where you can see these things. Hopefully we can see in here well enough to see that, in fact, there is, it's kind of difficult to see this, but right here in the middle of this, there's a little stalk. It's tiny, it's really small, but there's a little stalk right there that's holding up this spikelet. Wow, you can see it really well now that I put the thing down. So here you see a tiny, tiny, short little stalk, and then here is the spikelet. And these spikelets have only 1 floret in them. All right, so so let's go back over here. Let's see, Spikelets sessile. So they're not sessile. They have, it's small. It's a short little stalk, but they have a stalk. If they didn't have that stalk, and we're sitting straight down on that, the rachilla, the little stem thing, the axis that bears them, then we would read along some more. They're all on one side of a usually curvate, so a curvy axis that's from 6 to 15 centimeters long. And the genus here is Tenium, C-T-E-N-I-U-M, Tenium. And this is one, at least in Mississippi, grows down near the coast. And I think, man, I want to say toothache grass or something like that, but I may be getting the common name wrong. But it actually produces some chemicals. But if you chew on, I think it's the roots of it. It's been a long time since I've done this. I try all this stuff. I eat things and chew on things and whatever. Stinging nettles. So sometimes we would be out in a wetland or wherever in a riparian area, and we'd find stinging nettles, and it's like, oh, let's try them and see how they work, and then make your skin all tingly and it stings and it's painful and uncomfortable, and then you go find a remedy for it nearby, put that on there and make the stinging go away. Anyway, point of that is that I try these things. So there's this one that'll make your mouth kind of numb, and it's in the genus Tenium. It has a really curvy, the inflorescence kind of curves and curls around. It's kind of a cool plant. Anyway, that's not what we have here. So we come to the other number 12. Spikelets and the inflorescence are not with the above combination of characteristics. Okay, so it's not Tenium. I think I just said that, right? Spikelets very strongly flattened, sessile, and closely overlapping. Okay, so that's not it. We just saw they're not closely overlapping. I think you saw that here. So they're kind of spaced out just a little bit. They're not flat and pressed against this. They have a tiny little stalk, so it doesn't fit that description. So it's not a Spartina, which is a coastal, so a salt, well, some of the salt marsh, but a coastal grass. It grows some species in varying elevations within salt marshes. There are different species of Spartina, and it's kind of an interesting plant. Lots of stories there with different species and hybrids and whatnot with Spartina. But that's not what we have. The other number 13, spikelets are not very strong and flattened, mostly plano-convex. So plano-convex, so one side is kind of flat and the other side is convex, okay? Opposite of concave, convex. I guess they're opposite. Anyway, so it's the second number 13, which brings us into 14. Glooms both absent. So here's one of those structures that I talked about, the glooms, the lemma, the palea. So the glooms showing up here. The glooms are both absent, or sometimes one is present on the terminal spikelet of the raceme, okay? So let's look over here and see, do we see glooms? And so I've kind of pre-opened some of these, but on this, the one that's up here, if I can get it in the right position, I don't know what the odds are of that happening, but scoot it over a little bit. Right inside here, okay, I know my pointer is not going to let me, not going to be sensitive. See, I'm going to poke that and shove it around. That's not what I'm going to do. Right down there at the tip of this probe, back underneath this thing, is a gloom. Okay, so there's one gloom down there and then a gloom out here. So we have two glooms. Okay, I think I got that right. And that's, I think there's a lemma in here and the palea. But anyway, we have glooms present. Let's see, where were we? The glooms. Glooms both absent. Glooms are not both absent. One or both present on all spikelets, yes. The second gloom with a short, upwardly barbed awn. So an awn is like a little spiky thing or a long hair at the end of them. These don't have that. There's no hair out at the end of these things. Right, it would be coming off of here. I think it said it was on a gloom, so it would be coming off of that gloom. Where were we? Yeah, so on this 15 here. There's no awn. There's no awn on the gloom. Second number 15, okay, it's not on. Then we have fertile lemma transversely rugose for number 16, okay? So we have a lemma. All right. Transversely, so going crossways, rugose means wrinkled, okay? And so when we look at these, and you can see some lines on some of these things. Of course, these have been actually been sitting out for a while and kind of dried a little bit. You see some lines, but there's not transversely rugose. This thing is going to be really strongly wrinkled. It's going to be super obvious, and that's not what we're seeing on these things. Wait, and I think I'm even looking at a gloom there anyway. And this was on a on the lemma. So we actually have to get inside and find the lemma in here. Which we would have to get down inside this thing to the lemma that's below the caryopsis or the grain. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to just pull that out, right? But we can look inside here and So this is what I was saying, I think, earlier, like the little things that you have to dig out, the little parts and everything, and all the work that you have to do to get inside and look at grasses. Pushing that out of the way. And in fact, what I may have, this maybe I was wrong earlier, um, more than once. But anyway, I mean, it could be what we have is there's a gloom, and I don't know, the other gloom is even smaller or lacking. And then this is the lemma and the paleo, which would make sense based on what they're supposed to be. Regardless, this thing is not, it's not rugose. It's not wrinkled like they're talking about over there. Um, so it's going to be smooth, although that doesn't look smooth, but it's not wrinkled what they're talking about to make it where was that going to be? Paspalidium, I believe it is. Then we have the stalk of the spikelet terminated by a narrow ring-like callus to which, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, a cup-like first gloom. And so it just doesn't have that group of characteristics. So there's not a kind of a ring at the top of the thing, which actually is a cup-like first gloom. So that would be at the tip of the little the stalk here, and it's something that's relatively obvious when you have that present, and that's not present, so we don't have that structure there. So it's not as above. So now we're down in here, we're narrowing it down to a group of, what's that, 5? Spikelets in 4 rows. Okay, so we saw earlier there are only 2, so we know it's not this one. Spikelets not in 4 rows. And now the spikelet with the convex side turned away from the axis bearing it. All right, and so that's the case here. The lighting is being pretty uncooperative in a lot of ways with us, but I don't know how well you can tell it, but on this thing right here, the curved side is on over here, and then the flat side is back around in behind here. Okay, so the flat side is toward the axis on this thing. And so that was here in number 19. Spikelet with the convex side turned away, flat side toward the axis. So it's one of these two right here. Glooms both present, the first toward the axis. Okay, and I think that's the case here, where you have that tiny little gloom on the inside back here, and then a gloom here, and then I think either the lemma and the gloom are together, or I've somewhere or other this wasn't mature enough, and I may have even ripped the lemma out when I took this apart earlier and not noticed it. Um, this is why I'm not a grass expert. Um, but anyway, so where were we? In the 20. So glooms both present, the first toward the axis, or glooms not both present, the first one absent. And so we did have the one on the side next to the axis, so I don't think it's going to be a zonopus, which makes it a Brachiora. Okay, number 15 here. All right, so if I'm correct and it's Brachiora, then we would come over, skip over all of the rest of the grass key, and then here we have Brachiora. All right, in the Godfrey and Wooten key, they give us 3 options, which is really kind of awesome. That there are only 3 things to look at here. So the spikelet's more or less suffused with purple pigment, and that's not the case. So we'll flip back over here to the microscope, and I'll see if I can just run through here, and you can see they're green, 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 and I come over to another set of them, green, 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 green. Oh, and there you can see a stigma on that one protruding out of the flower. All right, but they're not. There's not purple pigment throughout these things. All right. All right, so it's not that. So they're green, born singly in each row. Okay, so there's individual spikelets. All right, those by themselves. The upper half of the second gloom and the first lemma with evident transverse veins connecting the longitudinal veins. So you remember when we were looking at that earlier, and I made the mention that, okay, so they're looking for some really serious wrinkles when they're talking about that rugoseness, and that's not what we have. But what we do have are transverse veins connecting these longitudinal veins on this. Okay, upper half of the blah blah blah, and they are on the upper half. Okay, so they're up here, and then it's kind of smooth down at the bottom. All right, feeling much better about this, right? And evident transverse veins connecting the longitudinal veins, and that's going to suggest that it's Brachiora Platyphila. Okay, Brachiora Platyphila in this area here, which is around Starkville, Oktibbeha County, around this area. It's a really common grass that you find in, as I would call, sort of moist soil type wetlands, wetlands that experience some drying during the year. They're wet during part of the year, dry during part of the year. Um, and this is a species I've run into pretty commonly. So Brachiora Platyphila, pretty confident that that's what we have here with that specimen. Okay, so it's a lot of work. You see keying one of these things out, a grass. Sedges are a lot of work too. We just got, in the video I did there. I mean, I'm kind of pick things that are going to be relatively easy for this particular activity anyway. Um, but and both groups are pretty difficult. I feel like I have more trouble with grasses though because of the issues with trying to decide, do I have a lemma, is it a gloom, what's missing, and so forth. Because some of these have missing parts that you have to try to find.